Welcome to 90 Minutes with Neville Southall, a podcast about giving a platform to people whose voices are often not heard. In this episode, we'll be talking about disability, about the challenges faced by people with disabilities, about questions of access and opportunity and care. I'm your host, James Rogers, and I'm here today with the big man himself, Neville Southall, as well as the other members of our podcast team, Dave Feely, Keith Mullen, Mel Harvey, and Simon Hart. Simon's going to be guiding the discussion today. How is everyone? Good.
Very well, thanks.
Very well, thanks, James. How are you?
Good. Now, we'll be speaking on today's episode to Ian Biddle, a campaign and journalist on disability issues, and also to Dawn Roselle Howens, who coaches gymnasts with disabilities, including her son, Sam, who has Down syndrome. We'll also be hearing about a project in Argentina, which offers university courses and internships to people with learning disabilities. Our first guest, though, is from a place very close to Neville's heart. Steve Johnson is the disability manager of Everton Football Club. He's also been a highly successful amputee footballer in his own right. He's won 3 World Cups with the England amputee football team, and he even achieved the accolade of World Amputee Footballer of the Year. Welcome to the podcast, Steve.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, Nev. You okay?
Yeah, I think listening to all your achievements, can you give us a bit of background on how you became such a good advocate for disability and how you won all them awards and what was it like growing up? And then obviously we don't know your story, so it'd be nice to hear your story.
Yeah, no worries. Well, from a young age, I was just, fanatical about football, really. I played whenever I could. When I was younger, there was no mobile phones. There was like 3 channels on the TV, and so all you did was play football in the street. So like any other young kids, you dreamed of being a professional footballer, and my team were Everton kind of thing, really, and I wanted to play for them, and right through school and stuff like that, I had that dream kind of thing, really, but it never really materialised, and I wasn't picked up by Everton or scouts or anything like that. So I just, I played local league. I mean, I'd say at my age as well, you could play open age football at 14. So I was playing, open age football at 14, and I was, a fairly decent footballer. The 2 local teams that I played for in the Southport area, I was like player of the year for them kind of thing. And then 1985, I was playing football in a sports hall in Southport, and the football went in the corner near the fire door, and unbeknown to me, some rainwater had got underneath the fire door, and I ran over to get the ball, and I slipped on the wet floor and went through a glass panel in the fire door. It's like Georgian wire glass, and as I pulled my left leg out of the fire door, it had cut all the back of my leg, cut all the nerves, veins, and arteries, and I knew I was in trouble, kind of thing, really. So took my Everton shirt off, wrapped it around the wound. A couple of lads were being sick in the changing rooms. My cousin was there. He was, put pressure on the wound to try and stem the flow of blood, kind of thing, really. And they rang the ambulance. They come, and one said to his mate, "You better hurry up," kind of thing, because this lad's in trouble, kind of thing, really. So anyway, got in the ambulance, took me to Southport Hospital, and I didn't feel any pain because I think obviously in shock, and I tried to, be as calm as possible because I didn't want to excite myself, kind of thing, really, because I didn't want the blood to pump out faster, kind of thing, really. So got to the hospital, okay, and then they took me from there to Broad Green, and kind of sedated me, really. They tried to save my leg, but in those days, it was difficult, kind of thing. The technology isn't what it is now, kind of thing, really. I had various different operations, about 50 odd pints of blood, and my parents made the decision to amputate my leg, which was difficult for them, really, because they knew how much I loved playing football, kind of thing, really. Luckily for me though, it was my left leg, because that was only for standing on kind of thing, really. So that was good kind of thing, really. But later on, that tended to work in my favour, kind of thing, really. So I mean, I saw the ambulance drivers a couple of weeks later, and they said to me, we thought, you weren't going to make it, kind of thing, really. So I've always tried to look at it as a positive kind of thing, really, with regards to, you're still here, you can still do whatever you want to do. I just took that, and I took that on, kind of thing, really, and just always try to have a positive outcome on life. I tried playing football again, local league, but because I'm both knee amputee, it was really difficult for me, and I couldn't play. So I'd gone from being able to play football whenever I wanted to being no football opportunities for me, really. As a disabled person, it wasn't just the same for me as an amputee. It was the same for other disabled people, whether they had, a visual impairment, sensory impairment, learning disabilities, or, physical impairments. There was no football opportunities for them. The FA weren't really doing anything, really, So I love playing sport, and I wanted to keep involved in sport. So I went down to Stoke Mandeville down in Aylesbury, which was like the disability centre for disability sport. I was disappointed, really, because there was no football at the time. So I actually took up volleyball and started playing volleyball. I joined 2 mainstream teams, and I got in the Great Britain disabled volleyball team. I was lucky enough to go to 2 Paralympics and World Championships and stuff like that. Then in 1987, a guy came over from America and introduced amputee football at Stoke Mandeville, and I took to it straight away. I've never really thought about it, but taking my leg off and playing with crutches, wrist crutches, and I was so mobile in it, and it was just like a breath of fresh air, kind of thing, really. So there was a group of us got together in the northwest of England, and started playing football regularly every week. And we were invited to the World Cup the following year, which was in Seattle in America. And from that, obviously I went on to win, 3 World Cups, and travel all over the world, really, which, before I lost my leg, I probably didn't do that kind of thing, really. So it was, it opened a lot of doors for me and a lot of opportunities for me to play sport.
So how did you cope mentally? I mean, you were pretty young when you did it. So how did you cope mentally? And do people come to you and ask you how to cope mentally? Do you have a lot of people coming to you who've lost limbs and things like that and asking your advice?
Yeah, I mean, myself personally, I thought I was fairly strong, kind of thing, really, with regards to, as I said, I mentioned before, I looked at it as I was still here. I can still do whatever I want to do, and I always looked at it as a positive kind of thing, really. But it's not obviously the same for everybody else, and other people struggle coming to terms with, losing a limb, and becoming disabled, kind of thing, really. So actually starting the football it wasn't just about playing football. It was about being a support mechanism for other players as well, with regards to, we'd talk about, different limbs that you could get. We'd talk about, different issues you have with some of the stump socks and stuff like that, and how we'd get around that, and just that mental health and well-being support, really, which, subconscious. Well, it wasn't called that in them days, kind of thing, but which it is now. That was a really important thing, and that social interaction with other people with similar disabilities, really, because my mum and dad really struggled talking to me about it, and I couldn't really speak to them about it, really, because obviously they hadn't lost a limb, kind of thing, really. So it definitely did help myself, and it helped a lot, a lot of the other participants, with the mental health, kind of thing, really. And some of them joined the football just for not necessarily for playing football, but just for that support, kind of thing, really.
So how much support did your mum and dad get? Like sometimes it's happening to you, but they sort of parents or the other people out, don't they? So how much support do they actually get?
They didn't really get a lot, to be honest. Well, it's 85. There wouldn't be that much support around for them, kind of thing, really. So it was difficult for them, and as I say, I'd had a few, not arguments, but fallouts with them about playing football because, you know, I'd broken my leg playing football, I'd broken my elbow playing football, and they didn't really want me to play, kind of thing, really. So, you know, when they had to make that decision to amputate my leg, it was like, wow, you know, he's going to hate me for it, kind of thing, which was not the case, kind of thing. It was exactly the right thing to do, kind of thing, really, you know. So it was difficult for them, and you know, I don't know how they got through it, really.
Well, and what were the laws and the first aid like around that time? You know, because you said you did it at a leisure centre. Nowadays, they'd always have first aiders, and it'd be really, you know, good insurance and all that risk assessments and the access. I think I suspect it was different them days, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was no risk assessments. There was no first aiders. You know, there was nothing, kind of thing, really. Nothing in the sports or nothing at the youth club that was at. You know, it was it was just non-existent. I mean, nowadays, you know, you wouldn't do that kind of thing. I mean, after my accident, they were supposed to take all the glass out of all the sports centres in Merseyside after that, you know, to stop that happening again.
Okay, I think Sam's going to jump in now a minute.
Yeah, hi Steve. I'm interested to know, from hearing your own experiences, how has that shaped the way you work now? You know, in your work with Everton and with their disability programs.
Yeah, as I say, I mean, I wanted, it was kind of like a light bulb moment for me, kind of thing, really, because it really gave me an inspiration to something I wanted to do, which was change the situation with regards to there being no football opportunities for disabled people. So I wanted to change that. So, I mean, I applied for jobs in disability sport, but it was difficult to get them, kind of thing, really. So I had to go to university as a mature student in Crewe, it was, and because that was the only place that did disability sports studies, kind of thing, really. I did that, and then I completed a degree. And then I was just really fortunate at that time because where I was based at Crewe House Age, it was the base of the English Federation of Disability Sport, and they were just starting a new project called the One-to-One Ability Counts Programme, which was trying to encourage football clubs to take on you know, people with disabilities, you know, through the community programs. So myself and Glenn Keeley, who Neville probably know, he was briefly at Everton for about 26 minutes, I think, in a 5-0 defeat, kind of thing. But we went round to 50 different clubs, signed 50 clubs up, and they started providing regular football opportunities for disabled people. And this was the first time, you know, any grassroots program had started, kind of thing, really. So it was really innovative, and it was the first, you know, start of that, and you know, the FA's, you know, disability football program. So Everton were one of the first clubs to get involved because One-to-One were the sponsors of Everton at the time. You know, so I was really made up with it, kind of thing, really. So I did that for 3 years, national program, and then when Wembley was built, they withdrew all the external funding, so I was made redundant. And anyway, a job came up at Liverpool Football Club as a disability sports development officer, kind of thing, really. So I was unemployed at the time, so I went for it, and my wife said, you know, you've got to go for it. So I applied for it, got an interview, got outside Anfield, and I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't bear the thought of wearing a red shirt, kind of thing, really, and working for them. So I just turned around and went home, and just told the wife I didn't get it, kind of thing, really. But fortunately enough for me, you know, a role at Everton came up a few months later, and that was in 2003, and I've been at Everton ever since, kind of thing, really, to this day. You know, so originally it was about giving disabled people the same football opportunities as non-disabled people, but the actual work we do through my program has changed and gone off of different tangents. But at the moment we've got 11 teams that represent the club, disabled teams. So we've got under 13 pan disability teams, under 16 pan disability teams. We've got a Down syndrome team. We've got an amputee team. We've got 3 male pan disability teams. And what I mean by pan disability is different disabilities playing together in the same team, but of similar ability level. And we've also got 2 female teams as well. We're one of the few clubs that have got female pan disability teams. So they train every week, and they play in competitions once a month, either local, regional, or national competition, sometimes even international competition. What we also do as well, we've got a huge schools program. So we go into about 12 special schools right across Merseyside and deliver physical activity sessions for disabled children. So we engage with about 350 kids a week, just giving them those physical literacy building blocks. You know, and then they have, you know, competitive element to that as well. We also work in Alder Hey Hospital. So we deliver like fun activity sessions, just to relieve, you know, the stresses of 24, you know, hour hospital care kind of thing, really. So through the pandemic, we've been doing that online, but normally we'd do face-to-face sessions with the children. And I say it's just about distracting them from the you know, the worries that they're going through, and to give their parents a little bit of respite as well. We also deliver a lot of holiday activities for disabled children and young people. So we go and speak to them, ask them what they want to do. It might be, you know, going bowling or inflatonation, stuff like that. So we go away and organise those, you know, activities. But we're also big about empowering disabled people. So, you know, we support them to be, you know, become volunteers, take qualifications, employment opportunities. So, you know, half of my staff have a disability and have come through my program, and you know, become volunteers. We've upskilled them, you know, through qualifications, and then, you know, they've got roles within Everton and the community. So it's a fairly big program, and last year we celebrated our 20th year of that program. You know, supporting disabled people, you know, not just in sport, but in everyday life kind of thing, really.
If you had to capture the essence of the importance of what you do in terms of the impact on the lives of people with disabilities and what sport gives them, how would you describe that? I
think traditionally, not myself, but other people have maybe have low expectations of disabled people, you know, with regards to whether it's in sport or employment or stuff like that, you know. So we try and look at the abilities of the individuals and try and empower them kind of thing, really. And you know, a lot of them are really grateful for what we're trying to do for them kind of thing, really. And it's some of it, I mean, they join the program for different reasons. Some of it could be social, some of it is, you know, they want to progress and you know, given that opportunity to achieve in life.
For me, it looks like it would be a fantastic thing to do with Alder Hey Hospital. So you know, when somebody comes in, they have to have a limb taken off,
yeah.
then you would be straight from part of the rehab. You know, so you're there because you've been through the experience. Do you work that closely with the hospitals, that you are actually part of the rehab for them, both mentally and physically, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, I still go and get my legs repaired and fixed at Fazackley Hospital. So, you know, from time to time, I do get asked to go and visit people in hospital who are struggling to come to terms with it mentally. And, you know, I do go and support them and help them in whatever way I can, and give them advice and stuff like that, about, you know, maybe benefits and stuff like that, or, you know, any issues they're having kind of thing, really. But and support with the mental health kind of thing, really, you know. So yeah, I definitely do that. So
I think the hospital should employ you just to go and just to be there, because you know what it's like when obviously happened to you. There's that darkness, isn't there? Because you don't know the future, and yet you've been through that, and you've come out the other side, and you know what you've achieved is amazing. But just to give them that little bit of hope and belief that it's not the end of anything, it's a start of something.
Very much so, yeah. And you know, the work we do at Alder Hey Hospital, it's not just with amputees, it's with all different disabilities, you know, kids on dialysis and stuff like that. Lots of different health conditions, some coming in from accidents and stuff like that. So, you know, a lot of the work we do is that mental health support, but also just have fun and a bit of laughter and stuff like that, really. And as I say, to give the parents a little bit of respite as well.
Steve, just one last thing from me. With regards to the England the England Amputee Football Association that you're part of, could you just explain what you do with them and the challenges you have in terms of the funding and keeping it going and keeping people supported?
Yeah, well, as I said, you know, when I lost my leg, there was nothing for amputees, kind of thing, really. You know, there was no football. The FA didn't want to know, really, weren't really doing anything to support disabled people at that time. So we did it ourselves, kind of thing, really. So we formed the England Amputee Football Association to support the work we were doing, and it's a national charity, kind of thing, really. So within that, we've obviously got the national team, which plays in European Championships and World Cups. We've got an under-23 next generation team for amputees. We've got a national league for amputees, which Everton is one of the teams in that. So we've got 2 divisions of national teams. And we've also got a junior program where we have junior camps. And again, it's football, but it's also that social interaction and that support mechanism for those kids, because a lot of them, they think that they're the only kid in the world that's an amputee, kind of thing, really. So when they come to the camps and there's 30 or 40 other kids of similar disabilities, kind of thing, they feel really at home, kind of thing. And it's also good for the parents to network with other parents as well and get that, we talked about mental health support and that, and it's that social support as well, mechanism for not just the kids, but the parents as well, kind of thing, really. So, that's, I say it's a national charity, which I'm the chairman of. I was one of the founder members of. All the people that work on that are all volunteers, and then we have to obviously do our own fundraising, kind of thing. So I think we've got a skydive coming up in March to try and raise funds for the work we deliver, kind of thing, really. The FA don't really support all national impairment groups. They support some, but not others. So we have to do a lot of that fundraising ourselves. So the national team probably meet one weekend a month, kind of thing. So we have to support the accommodation, the facility hire, and all that, the coaches and stuff like that to deliver those. So it's a great charity, kind of thing, and it does a lot of good work, kind of thing, really, to support football opportunities for amputees.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. If you don't mind sticking around, we'd love to hear a little bit more from you later when we have a bigger discussion with all our guests. Now, our second guest today doesn't have Steve's football and prowess, but he is an Evertonian. He is also a campaign and journalist and the 2020 winner of the Orwell Prize for exposing Britain's social ills, namely for his investigation into the abuse of vulnerable people within the healthcare system. Ian Biddle, thank you for joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you. You obviously saw me playing this morning if you say I don't have that sort of prowess.
I wish.
Yeah, I suppose, Ian, my first question, following on from Steve's, is why do the FA and everybody only, what is the criteria for funding in this country? Because when I did some work around the deaf football team for Great Britain, and they didn't get any funding for ages and ages. And I'm not sure what the criteria actually is to get funded through the FA or any sporting organisation for disability.
I don't know the answer to that. And I think what Steve's done is amazing. And, I pay tribute and take my hat off to him. But I do think what you've put your finger on is the fact that we have a very vigorous diversity debate going on in the country at the moment, which is great, in my opinion, where we're talking a lot about the situation facing women, abuse of women, prejudice against women, against gay people, against trans people, against Black people, ethnic minorities. But it seems to me strange that within the diversity debate, the one group that often gets left out are people with disabilities, especially people with learning disabilities. And I think in a way, what you're putting your finger on there is the fact that we do have a society where, curiously, there is this huge disenfranchisement of a very large minority that perhaps more than any are excluded from our society. And I think it's a real shame. It's a loss for society because it enriches society to have more involvement of everyone. And I think it is a real shame that we have this situation.
I think, I work with kids with learning difficulties all the time, every day. And their problems are a lack of resources. So, around mental health, it's, 3 years sometimes to get an assessment for something, a year to see an educational psychologist. Then everybody wants to use the money for academic purposes. they don't want to treat the child, they want to treat the education. And I think that we need to look at education a different way.
I agree. I think, I mean, obviously resources are at the root of a lot of these issues. There isn't the support for people. Diagnosis for a condition like autism can take a long, long time. And that can delay getting the right sort of support. The support isn't there. Councils are, they've seen budgets slashed. Demand is growing, especially from working age adults. And it is a real problem. But I think you ask yourself, why is it that we allow this situation to go on? Why do we have such dire funding? Why do we allow people to be so unsupported that they can't participate in society? Why do we have such low employment levels for people with disabilities, especially people with disabilities, with learning disabilities? And again, I think it all comes down to the fact that it's an excluded minority within society. It was mentioned at the start about the campaign I've done on people with autism and learning disabilities. But we live in a country where, in the heart of the NHS and funded by the NHS, people are being locked up in solitary confinement for up to 20 years in solitary confinement. And they're fed through hatches sometimes through hatches in a hole in the door. They're not allowed human interaction. They're not allowed outside. They're physically restrained by gangs of people. So you can have teenage girls with 6 guys dragging them to the ground, injecting them, sedating them. They're restrained by clothing. They're not allowed to have any facilities within their rooms. And this imprisonment, this incarceration is happening in the heart of our own society, funded by the health service because we don't fund proper support. And therefore it's deemed easier just to throw these people away and lock them up in this abusive situation. And the more I heard about it, I was so shocked at what I was hearing, even though I'd heard of some bit. But this is going on right in the heart of our society today. And I think that's emblematic of how we treat particularly people with autism and people with learning disabilities. And I think it's just disgusting.
Ian, sorry, I wanted to ask you, I know I followed your work on this. What actually sparked your interest, and how shocked were you by the scale of this problem that you found?
Well, I guess for me, it's very personal. I'm sure I would have been probably as blasé as most members of society, if I'm honest. But I have a daughter who has profound learning disabilities. She's now 27, but it was obviously a huge shock when it happened. We went through huge depression when it happened. The condition wasn't known what it was. And that depression is very like grieving, although it wasn't known at that time. It's like grieving, and you go through a very dark period while you come to terms really with the loss of the child you thought you have and the child you really have. This happened when she was 6 weeks. Everything was quite normal until then, although her condition wasn't diagnosed for another 2 decades. And we had no support whatsoever for many years. We looked after ourselves. We slept on the floor. It's a very difficult time. And that, it's a constant battle. The problem is never so much the condition, although she has very profound health needs with epilepsy. So she has seizures every day, any one of which potentially could be fatal. But the problem is not just the disability. The problem is really all the problems, there's things that go around that, constantly fighting the system to get the support which any other child might take as normal, fighting to get the education support, fighting to get just ability to access very basic services in society. And then it all falls off a cliff again when you go from being a child to an adult and you have to go through it again. Now there's a huge staff crisis because there's not any staff because of Brexit has made matters worse. So that's driving extra problems on the system. And there is just this constant pressure on anyone in this situation. So that was for me, it was very personal. I was particularly, she has learning disabilities, and that's, the more you look, you see that here is a group of people who are more disenfranchised, I think, than any other in our society. And then I had heard about this situation facing people with autism and learning disabilities, but I hadn't really begun to take it on board until I spoke to a guy called Jeremy, who is this amazing father who comes from Walsall, I think, the West Midlands. And he told me the story about how he walked along this corridor, and he's described it to me in words I've never forgotten, that it was like that scene in the film with Hannibal Lecter, where you have the corridor with all these cells. And in one of the cells through a hatch was his daughter. And his daughter was becoming very bloated because she was being fed crap food. She wasn't allowed out to exercise. She was a girl who loved to laugh, and she liked animals, and she loved the outdoors. She wasn't getting any of that, and she was in this horrible system in solitary confinement. And so Jeremy told me about that. I wrote a furious article about how this was like sort of modern bedlam in our society. That led to questions in Parliament, and that case of Beth became quite a cause célèbre, and I'm glad to say she's now out and living a happy and fulfilling life in the sort of house she should be, with adequate support and enjoying life. But I then began to investigate and heard of thousands of other cases. And then I remember talking to one other mother whose kid was, she was from the West Country, and I'll never forget again with her that she told me about her boy and how the doctor said, we just need to assess. Can we take him away for a month to assess the situation? So she, of course, trusting the doctors, said yes. And the doctors took him away, and she didn't speak to her son for 6 weeks. And then the next time she saw him, he could barely speak and he was drooling. And this was a kid who again was a joker and full of life, a teenager who again liked sport and being outside. And she just said to me, I thought at that moment that I'd failed my child by letting him get into this system. And that boy's still in the system today. And he's still within this hellish system, which is existing within the heart of the NHS. So everyone lauds the NHS, which of course is a wonderful thing, but equally there's a lot of darkness going on in its very heart. And again, you know, there are hundreds of these cases, and Jeremy, the council, tried to silence him by taking out a court order to stop him talking to the media. That's happened to many other people. There's a very famous case of a man called Tony from Brighton, who's had 20 years in this system. And his parents again were silenced, and it took the BBC to go to court to get a permission to raise his case in public again. And to me, I mean, that's how I got involved with it. There's now been, I think, 5 public inquiries as a result of the campaign. Politicians keep promising to end it. Everyone accepts it's wrong. Everyone accepts that for someone with autism in particular to be put in a situation like this, it makes their condition worse, much, much worse. So, and indeed, I've even spoke to someone in Belgium who was allowed, under there they have euthanasia, and she was allowed to have permission for euthanasia because of the trauma she had suffered in this very abusive situation. And so everyone accepts that it's wrong, no one defends it, and yet it still carries on and nothing gets done. And yet it costs more, it damages people. And I think it also exposes failures within our mental health system, the wider mental health system, that we have a system that's reliant on sedation, incarceration and restraint, rather than respect for human beings and treating them as human beings as some other societies do.
And Ian, the government's health and social care bill, well, I think I have a sense of what your answer might be because I was following your work on it, but did that offer any possible remedies to this problem or not?
The only good thing was that I think I persuaded Matt Hancock in a face-to-face meeting, and hopefully it's going to go through, that to call autism a psychological condition essentially legitimizes the idea that people should be bunged into a system of incarceration purely for the fact that they have a different approach to the world, that they have autism, when it isn't. You know, it's not a psychiatric problem. It's just a way of life. It's a type of person. But beyond that, no. I mean, you know, we've had all these government inquiries, all these health ministers stand up, all these exposés of abuse within the system by the BBC, by ITV in Scotland, and still it carries on, and still people are being put into the system, and the horrors continue. I find it quite depressing in a way that the campaign and brilliant work done by people at the BBC and ITV has led to such focus on this, and yet there's been all these inquiries. Jeremy Hunt, the former health service secretary, has come out and said it's an absolute scandal, and spoke about his own failure in failing to stop it, and said it's wrong that anyone goes into this system. And indeed, he agrees with me that we should actually shut down any secure systems within the psychiatric service. But it carries on, nothing changes.
On a broader point regarding exclusion, because as you mentioned at the very beginning, Steve offered, really heartening examples of inclusion. Did the pandemic to you underline, accentuate some of the problems we have in society?
Well, we had a situation where blanket do not resuscitate orders were imposed on people with disabilities. And what does that tell you about society? Without their consultation, without the consultation of their family, we had a system whereby the social care system was seen as so secondary to the health service that people with infections were put into care homes. We have a care home system where we have a lot of people like private equity have got involved because they see it as a way to make profit, and they put the money offshore and they take a lot of money out of the system while paying peanuts to frontline staff. And yet this system was exposed. We're getting bigger and bigger care homes, which are less like a home and more like an institution. And of course, when you have an infection, that makes the damage worse. So yes, I think what we saw very clearly there was that social care is seen as a very second-rate service. We all know that social work, that the care staff are, ridiculously underpaid. That is, the system is chronic, it's collapsing, and yet nothing gets done about it. If you look at the last, since austerity came in, the NHS has had, although everyone talks about it not having enough money, it's had, I think it was 27 billion extra was put in the first 10 or 15 years. I haven't got the exact data. And yet the care system was actually cut of funds at a time when pressures were building from both older people and people with disabilities, working age people. And I just think it's always seen as a second-class public service, despite the fact that it employs more people than the health service. And what it does is just as crucial, even if it's not as dramatic as the sort of brilliant work done in accident and emergency services and things like that. So I'm afraid, I think, yes, the pandemic has shown yet again that nothing's changing on this front. The social care is seen as a secondary public service, and that really elderly people, we don't have a lot of respect in our society for people who are very old, people who are very sick, and sadly for people with disabilities, I think, despite the fact there's, so many brilliant community schemes going on, fantastic people trying to change it, brilliant charities and people like that trying to do, not necessarily the big ones, but some of the smaller ones. So things are, I guess, getting better. We don't have bedlam quite. You can't pay to see people, but we have advanced, I think, a lot less than we think as a society in this area.
How do we change the culture, Ian? How do we try and change the culture of the country? Because it seems to me that it's only going to go through education. And I would love to see the primary schools, they won't start any particular school until 7. So all the tests and everything can be done till 7. And that way we could set up a proper individual plan for each child that came through. And then they would start their education with everything they needed. And the other problem I think we've got is that when we particularly can't deal with the kids in our place and we try and move them on, people don't want them anymore, the behavioural things, because they just want to medicate people to keep them quiet so they can keep their cash. You've got 4 kids in the house who are on, you're charging 10 grand a week for, but you medicate them. It's a lot easier than getting behavioural issues, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think education is critical. I think that the key really is it's based on fear, I think, a lot of the time. It's based on fear of people who are different. And if you haven't come across people who maybe have profound disabilities or learning disabilities or autism, then you're more likely to be scared of them. I think workplace interaction is really important. I think there's a 38% employment gap between people with disabilities and people without disabilities. And for people with learning disabilities, it's something like 65 or 70%. So I think just getting people together, socializing together, playing football together, going to events together, going to school together, I think is really, it's that classic thing. It's the more people interact, the more you meet people, then the more you realize you have in common. Because at the end of the day, everyone wants the same thing in life, which is to have a bit of a laugh, to have a decent job, to have a decent home, to have their family cared for. We all have the same ambitions and aims, and it doesn't really matter who you are. And I think the more you bring people together and remind people of that, the better, really.
And I think for me, it's about, well, the last Prime Minister really, and this Prime Minister, it's about, they've divided the country, and everybody now is a judge. You know, all your major television programs are all about judging people. Every competition you see is about making instant judgment on people. And I think that trickles down into how people interact with other people, especially the younger element, because they make a decision, oh, you're ugly, you're this, you're no good. You know, if you look at sort of X Factor or whatever, they go on there for 2 minutes and they're told they're either good or they're rubbish. So I don't know what that does to their mental health when they're told they're absolute rubbish, but you're killing somebody's dream on a Saturday night for other people's entertainment, and that can't be right either, can it?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, social media certainly is a factor in all this. There's no doubt about that. I mean, it's a big factor in all the mental health problems we've got. That sort of striving for perfection and the idea that everyone is perfect on social media, when of course no one's perfect in real life.
No.
So I think that is a big factor. And I think it's easy. I mean, certainly the policies of the recent governments in terms of funding have not been helpful, to put it mildly, for social care. But it is worth remembering nothing changed really much under their predecessors. It's always the health service gets attention. It's never social care. And some of the worst abuses being done are being done within the NHS. There are private vulture-like private companies who are exploiting this and creaming off vast profits and putting it all offshore. But equally, there's dire practice in the NHS. Some of the worst councils are Labour and Green, and some of the best councils are Labour and Green. So I think it's, although I, like you, would probably have issues with the funding put forward in recent years, I think it's not just about funding. Funding is massively important. But I think you have to ask yourself, why do we allow this funding situation? Why are Labour politicians not jumping up and down and saying, put money into the care service, help people? Because it all goes back, I think, to a society which undervalues a minority, and that's at the root of all the problems. That this group of people, particularly with learning disabilities, and to a lesser extent in getting better, but still existing for people with physical disabilities, are just not valued as much as other members of society. And that's at the root of everything which I've talked about, which you see, which we'll see. And I think that's the core problem, which is that lack of respect, that lack of interaction, that lack of trust, lack of faith, lack of love, really, for people who are slightly different from the majority.
And if it, just the last thing, if you had you could change one thing tomorrow, what would it be?
I think maybe just to try and somehow get everyone just to, maybe just force people to socialize a little and interact a little and break down these barriers and the fears, because I do think fear is at the root of a lot of it. I mean, obviously there's changes, reforms I'd like to make about access and things like that. But if I could do one switch, it would just somehow, maybe it's a bit hippie-ish, but it's sort of bringing people together and just trying to get people to understand the shared values that we have and the shared ideas and interests.
So Ian, listen, thank you so much for sharing your work with us today. That was amazing for you to do that with us. If you don't mind sticking around, we'll be hearing a bit more from you later, hopefully.
Sure, pleasure.
Thank you again. So before we introduce you to our final guest, we'd like to shine a light on a special project in Argentina called Cascos Verdes, which means green helmets. Simon has spoken to one of the directors of Cascos Verdes, Gonzalo Bazgan, who told us about their work in offering university degrees and internships to people with learning disabilities. Here is what he had to say.
And it's an organization that gives the possibility to people with intellectual disabilities to attend the university. We created a 4-year program on environmental education for people with intellectual disabilities, specially designed for them, so they can go to university. And during the last 2 years of the university, they also deliver trainings on environment to companies, to schools, to civil society as a whole. So they have the opportunity also to stand in front of people and show what they are capable of. It was the idea of Javier Ureta, the founder of Cascos Verdes. He was at that time studying environmental engineering in a university here in Buenos Aires. And he had a friend who has a brother with Down syndrome. And he thought, why this guy, he's not he has not the opportunity to attend the university the same as me and study the same as I am studying, because the disability is not only something that is inner to the person, but also is part of the barriers the society puts to that person. So he thinks it's a matter of opportunities. So he started digging why that opportunity doesn't exist, and why people with Down syndrome, for example, couldn't attend to a regular university. So he started creating and adapting the materials he was working and he was studying to make it more simple, to make it more available to everyone. And that's how he created the first course of Cascos Verdes back in 2009, I think, in the same university he was studying. We give the university the full package, the students, we do the admissions, we hire the teachers and professors, and we design the whole program. So they only have to give us a place for the courses to happen, and also like the end of the diploma, like a certification they are attending to the university. But for us, it's not only the place, because they are in places, for example, in the classroom, there are only people with disabilities, but they share the rest of the university life with the rest of the students. They go to the cafe, they go to the library, they go to a lot of places that they are integrated. Mm. So that's the real inclusion for me, where they see themselves going to the same places with people with no disabilities. And the people with no disabilities, the rest of the students, they start thinking themselves, oh my God, there's a person with Down syndrome here in the university with me. They started breaking those barriers of what one can do, one is able to do, and what are their tools to grow in their lives, like everyone. But the confidence they feel when they stand in front of people, it's huge. The change that we see during the 4 years for a person when they first enter the university the first day, maybe in hand with their mothers and fathers and with their parents, and the last day they receive their diploma after delivering trainings to a lot of people in companies and people in government offices and other schools. It's a completely different person. It's a personal path of growth. I think it's the same that that happened for us when we go to university. When we enter, when we are 17 or 18 years old, it's completely different than 4, 5, 6 years when we finish our path in the university. They receive like a salary, kind of a salary for their, it's like an internship, so it's a paid internship. So depending on how many trainings they deliver every month or how many actions they do, because it's not only trainings, maybe they do like ORCARDs. I don't know if ORCARD is the name in English. They grow vegetables. They learn how to grow vegetables as a volunteering for other companies, and so yes, it's kind of a salary. It's the first. It's important for us for them to get paid, because not all of them know how to manage their own money. So we also give them the tools to have their first salary and what is important to buy and how to manage their own money, and all that things are important for them to grow as well.
Let me also bring in at this point our third guest, Dawn Roselle Howens. Dawn is from the Active Therapy Foundation, which works to make sport accessible to young people with disabilities. Her father, Dave, set up the disability program for British gymnastics in the 1980s, and today she helps him to run the Spartak Gymnastics Club, which is based at Edge Hill University, and it's a club for people with disabilities. Dawn, thank you for joining us today.
Hi.
Hi, Dawn.
Hi.
Can I ask you one question? Because I've been dying to ask all afternoon. The terminology. I always get everyone's scared to say something because they don't know what the terminology is. For for disabled, disability, what are the right things to say at the right time? Because I don't think people know.
People with disabilities, it's always people first. That's the main thing. It's always people first. And that's the only thing really that you need to remember. So yeah, people first.
So do you want to tell us a little what you do?
Okay, so Active Therapy Foundation is based on the principles of gymnastics, but it's not gymnastics. About 35 years ago, my dad was my gymnastics coach. I was a gymnast from the age of 4, and he was asked to take a class of students from the local special school. And he said yes. And he got these students in the gym, along with their teachers and teaching assistants. And he started a gym session. And obviously at that point, it was very new. It was a learning process. But there was one particular gymnast, and all she did was run around. He had absolutely no control over her whatsoever. A young lady with Down syndrome. Now, he basically at that point said, I can't have her in the gym. I have other things to focus on. I can't have her in the gym. And after weeks of hassling from her mum, he agreed to accept her in the gym. And he sat down and he thought, okay, what do I want most out of this young lady? And all he wanted was for her to sit still. So he broke it down like you do in gymnastics. You break these skills down, you teach the parts, and you put them together to make the whole skill. So it took him about 7 months to teach this young lady to sit still. And what he did, he had an extra half hour with her mum, teaching her to sit still. After 7 months, she could sit and look him in the eye, and she could outstare him. A short while after that, she was performing at the Special Olympics in America, a whole floor routine in front of 17,000 people and on live television. So that was the power of self-control. And that is what active therapy is based upon, self-control. So we work with people with learning difficulties because we can teach them self-control. We work with people with physical disabilities in other aspects, and self-control is a huge part of that. And that's how active therapy was born. And it's the whole breaking the skill down. So whether it's learning to clean your teeth, well, if you can't hold a toothbrush, how can you clean your teeth? So we break it down to the smallest part, and then bring the skill into one. So that was where active therapy comes from. The gymnastics club, Spartak, started from there, really. As a gymnast, as my dad was the coach of the disabilities group, I had to stay behind. I had to help with the coaching of it and things like that. So as much as I wasn't a major role in those days, I've always known it. I've always known people with disabilities in the gym. From those that went on to be 10 times world champions to those that you had to chase and bring them back to where they should be. We still have to do that. Don't get me wrong. It's nice when we get gymnasts at a young age, because part of being in the gym is, bear in mind, you've got a whole gym that's set up with a trampoline, a vault, you know, all the bars, all the P-bars, the bars for the girls, the floor area. And it can be a dangerous environment. So what we need to do is we need to teach those young people to sit still. we need to teach them to listen and respond, and then react in the correct way. So we do a lot of response work. So we could be sat in the gym with a group of young people with disabilities on the floor. We'll use beanbags, we'll use rubber spots with colours. We'll say, Sam, take the red beanbag to Anna, and then come back and sit down on the blue spot. Now, of course, those instructions could be 3, 4, 5-part instructions. Often, and with Sam, we had to start with 1-part instructions. But then they have to sit still and still listen, because we'll choose random gymnasts, so they have to listen for their name. Now, once you've got that sort of response out of somebody and they're sitting still, you can run a really fun and active gymnastics session. Any form of coaching, you need your participants to be able to listen and respond. But even if they can't listen and respond, you still take them into the environment and you start from the beginning. You teach them to sit still and to listen and respond, because once they come into the gym, regardless of who they are, what disability, what ability they have, they are all equal.
And I suppose they learn by watching as well, don't they?
Absolutely. I've got gymnasts that have been involved in the club for over 20 years. And quite often we could say, Nicola, go and sit with Sam, please, do some stillness work. Or James, go and sit with Nathaniel, go and do some stillness work. And it's our older, more experienced gymnasts with the learning disabilities that have been there, and their parents are sat there going, yeah, we've been there. They will go and do the work as well. And they love that responsibility.
But sometimes it's the questions you're giving them. Like at home, it would be shut up and sit down.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're making, they're following the pattern, because gymnastics is all rhythm anyway, isn't it? And you're all doing bits and pieces to get the whole, like I say. So where you normally go home, it's all shut up and sit down. You're actually going, well, here's the attention. This is why I need to do it. Let's have a bit of fun going from A to B or blue to green or whatever it is. So you get a bit more response, but you get the same response in a different way, aren't you?
Well, it spills into the home, doesn't it? Yeah. Because you take that young gymnast home, that young person, they know what sit down means. They know what be still means.
Yeah.
And I know that because, I mean, I have a son with Down syndrome. His name is Sam. He's now 10. Because I was already involved in the gym, it was one of those things that I had a son with Down syndrome. We are absolutely blessed. He's been involved in the gym since he was a baby, since he was newborn, really. You know, we'd set up a space for him in the corner when he was young. Even when he started to walk, he had a little push-along trolley. And he'd pretty much have free rein. And our older gymnasts are so conscientious that they would just pick him up, move him out the way, do their vault. You know, it was great. So I know that the environment that he's been in and the skills that he has learned in the gym spill out and have enabled Sam to work through a mainstream school. Don't get me wrong, it's never plain sailing. And yes, there is often a fight for what you need. But Sam is also lucky that we have Active Therapy Foundation. And through years of experience working with other clients, much older clients, going through education systems, we're supporting not just the client, the child, the person, we're supporting their family. We're looking at the EHCPs, the educational healthcare plans, work with them. We're going with them to meetings. Because as you all know, sometimes the system hasn't got the funding to be the best that it could be. And as parents, you would like to think that you can take the advice of the professionals. And when it's an old system, and sometimes you can think twice. If there's nobody else there to give you another point of view, then it's difficult. You have to trust those professionals. Whereas active therapy, we're all about actively the client, the person with the disability, doing it themselves. So if society says, well, that person can't walk, give them a wheelchair, active therapy's view would be, right, well, that person can't walk. Let's look at a wheelchair as an interim period. Let's work on the muscle development to enable them to stand. The other muscles to enable them to stand on one leg, the balance. We would break all these skills down and treat the wheelchair like the interim tools that they need to get them to walk. Hopefully the wheelchair then will progress to a walker or sticks or whatever. So rather than prop them up with a wheelchair, let's just teach them to walk.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're reaching for the stars instead of looking at the ground.
Absolutely. And quite frankly, we go in for perfection. We're not going for functional physical movement if it's physical disability. And with the learning disabilities, we're not going for functional behavior, just be able to get by. We are going for perfection. This is what we expect. We have very high standards. Where we get from there is all a bonus. But if we start out reaching for the stars, if we reach the sky, then it's a great start, isn't it?
Yeah. So I don't know much about, to be fair. Down syndrome.
Sorry, Neville, I missed that. You don't know much about
Down syndrome. So could you explain a little bit about that? Because everybody lumps them together, but they're all individuals, aren't they? So it's really hard. You know, we see a group of Down syndrome people, you don't know whether they're all the same, I suppose, level, or they all got different levels, or they all got different things.
Do you know what? Are we all the same?
Well, no. So it's hard sometimes. But you don't want to. If I look at somebody with a broken leg, I can tell what he can and can't do. And what Down syndrome, it's difficult when you're trying to assess what they could do and couldn't do unless you know them.
Of course. Well, people with Down syndrome are far from all the same. Quite the opposite. Just as we are far from all the same. Yeah. I kind of, or rather we as active therapy, we and Spartak, we kind of work on the fact that people with Down syndrome are likely to take probably on average 4 times longer to learn something than somebody in the mainstream. Right. So we have to consider that as well. Sam also has autistic tendencies. Right. So that throws something else into the mix too. You know, people with Down syndrome, they're what we call kinesthetic awareness is not always the same as ours. Their balance, the part of the brain that deals with balance doesn't develop the same as ours. So that makes them different to us. But within that, they all learn and develop at different paces. One person with Down syndrome, or a lot of people with Down syndrome, can't hear a beat. Or if they hear a beat, they hear the beat and then they clap. Right. Sam can hear a beat perfectly and he can clap on time because he can preempt that beat. Right. So he can sing and he can clap in time with music. Sam struggles with speech. Whereas I have a stepsister actually with Down syndrome. She's in her, she's 40 now. Her speech is beautiful, depending on what she's saying, obviously, because we're all different. So are people with Down syndrome, and they have opinions, you know? So they listen to the news, they use social media, the same as everybody else. They form their own opinions. A lot of the time, their opinions need to be guided. Yeah. And obviously, we need to teach that decision-making is a process. because unless you understand the consequences of the decisions that you're making, then is it right to offer the decision, or do you need a little bit of guidance, especially in the adults with Down syndrome, guidance on their decision making? You don't want to dictate to any adult, but unless the consequences of those decisions are understood, it's tricky. So people with Down syndrome are all very different to each other.
So the other question, you know, when you're saying about the speech and things like that, well, obviously gymnastics, and you do what you do, it's based on rhythm, isn't it? So does, after gymnastic things, do the speech get improved? Does the handwriting improve? Coordination improve?
The gymnastics isn't just rhythm. Gymnastics is physical awareness and coordination, and that has to be taught. So I mentioned kinesthetic awareness. If I said to you, Neville, stand up, you would stand up. If I said to a young person that's never had that said to them, and they have a learning disability, stand up, they don't know what that means. So you stand them up and you say, well done. Then you sit them down again. And you will repeat that process until they understand that saying stand up means the movement of going from sitting to standing. It's been taught. They understand stand up. Speech, well, we can treat speech and the tongue and the face as a muscle. If they have low muscle tone around their tongue and their face, we can do the same thing. The best way for me to relate it to you right now is if I said, without moving, feel the back of your hands. You can't. You know they're there, but you can't actually feel them. If somebody then came to you and put a very light finger on the back of your hand and then said, feel the back of your hand, you could. The same with the face and the tongue and the muscle movement within it. So the kinesthetic awareness of opening your mouth and saying, ah, isn't always there. So we have to teach them by making them feel how to open their mouth and say, ah, then they're feeling the muscles that they need to use speech. You often find people with Down syndrome will talk without opening their mouth very wide, which then makes it difficult to understand what they're saying. And although us as parents understand them, you want them to go out in the world and be understood by everybody else, to fit into society, because that's the aim of all of it. You want society to accept them as people and them to fit into society with as little stress and anxiety for them. And although they are likely to need support, as little as possible.
Well, I think lovely. I think Sam's got a question for you.
Yeah, Dawn, just speaking about fitting in, we heard the Cascos Verdes example before, which I know you'd already listened to. Do you see any similar opportunities, possibilities in this country, or are there parallels with what you do with your gymnastics group?
To be quite honest, I see an awful lot of parallels. Now, their young people are going into university, and my young people, my young gymnasts, are going to events that are mainstream events. They're huge events for gymnastics. They're not specifically for people with disabilities. but my gymnasts are so used to the environment that they fit in perfectly. I mean, that's where we met you, Simon. And at that point, we have people that recognize us from all over the world, and they come up to us and say, oh, great, when are you performing next? Can we come and see you? So we actually produce a flyer so we can hand them out to let people know when we're performing next. It's creating that opportunity to be part of a whole community rather than just a community of people with disabilities. It's getting society to accept them as people, rather than just sticking to household or whatever. Fighting for the opportunities as well is tricky. I know that from personal experience with Sam going into mainstream schools and the difficulties we have with him going into a high school. Slightly digressing from what you've asked, using that, I've recently looked at high schools for Sam, and it was very clear that my local high schools have virtually no experience with people with disability. Well, people with Down syndrome, sorry. They have a lot of experience with people on the autistic spectrum, and they have lovely setups. But when it comes to a more severe learning disability, they have no experience. Now, we were very fortunate in the fact that we found a high school with a very forward-thinking head teacher who basically said, yes, let's do this. Let's pave the way. Let's make it work for Sam. And not only will it be good for Sam, it will be good for the other students and the teachers. That's what we want society to be like. Change doesn't happen overnight. When I think about how long ago my dad started the gym and started active therapy, yes, you'd like to think that it has come an awful long way, but in reality, it really hasn't. We've heard about funding from different people and things like that. It's not there. I have to say, though, within British Gymnastics now, the team that run the not the competition events, but the likes of the Gym Fusions, and they had the team for the Gymnastrada. They know us well. We have an awful lot of respect between us. They are very accommodating now. They know that we have the experience of taking these gymnasts away, and they couldn't be more helpful. So change is happening. I just don't see it as much in a wider society. And this is why we are grateful that we have this head teacher that said, yes. And he sees not just the potential for Sam, but the potential for the rest of the students and the teachers to get to know somebody with a disability and to just accept him as the same, just slightly different.
Dawn, listen, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. I've got a quick question for Steve, Ian and Dawn, which is, you've had an opportunity to listen to everyone's experiences today. Have anything struck you as a similar challenge that you're experiencing in your own aspects of life, or are there kind of similar themes that you're seeing? Has anything struck you as particularly interesting today?
What struck me as interesting, there's a couple of things actually, on the spilling out onto everyday life. When we go back to the Green Helmets and the work that they're doing, he talked about commitment. We find that exactly the same in the gym. Obviously, we run different gym sessions. And if we want to offer a place to somebody within our display team, we know what benefits there are. We see it with our other gymnasts, but it really is a huge commitment. And it's a whole family commitment, because the family have to bring the gymnast twice a week. They have to pay for all the events that we do. And it can work out an awful lot of money. So that level of commitment is definitely the same for us as it is over there.
I think Mel Harvey's got a question. Mel?
Yeah, I'd probably direct this, well, to all our guests really, but maybe particularly to Steve. What's come through to me listening to all our guests today has been the power of sport. So Ian talks about mingling and socialising. Clearly, Dawn is doing, and the other people that she works with is doing amazing work, as is Steve. What's the power of sport, Steve, to bring us all together and get us breaking down these barriers?
You know, the sport is great, as you say, a great way of bringing people together. It's that social interaction. So people might not necessarily, you know, be particularly bothered about playing sport, but it's that social interaction with other people that they value quite a lot, kind of thing, really. You know, it's that meeting other people, you know, particularly in the pandemic, you know, a lot of disabled people were isolated and at home, kind of thing, because some of them have got extra vulnerabilities, kind of thing, you know. So, you know, since we come back, you know, it's been highlighted that social interaction that they haven't been getting, kind of thing, really was really important for them, kind of thing, really. Just speaking about Dawn, what Dawn was saying there, I mean, there's a lot of parallels that, and it can relate to a lot of the work we do in the special schools with regards to, you know, breaking the skills down. And I think for coaches as well, really, if you can work with this, you know, people with disabilities, you can work with anybody, kind of thing, really, because you know, if you can break those skills down to the little details, then you'll be, you know, a really good coach, kind of thing, really.
And Ian, would you recognise sport as being important? You talked about socialising and breaking down barriers and everybody mixing more. Can sport help with that?
Absolutely. I mean, I loved when Dawn was talking, she was talking about in the gym, and I think it was her son, or there was a kid there who the gymnast, you know, obviously a gym, it can be quite frenetic with all the gymnastics and the equipment and everything and quite high velocity. I love the idea, she said they just came and picked up the child, put him to the side and carried on. You know, it's not hard, is it? It's not difficult, and it's a sweet little bit of interaction. For me, with my daughter, she has very profound disabilities. She doesn't, you know, she uses a wheelchair. She doesn't talk. She doesn't walk. She doesn't. She's profoundly visually impaired, so she's at the very extreme end of the spectrum. But one thing she absolutely loves is going in a swimming pool, and she loves being in a pool. And she would spend all day in a pool if she was allowed to be. So, you know, I think for anyone, sport can be a liberating experience and a joyful experience. And she also loves music, so she loves wheelchair dancing. It might be quite far removed from many people's vision of dancing, but it's funny, and you know, she enjoys it. So I think for anyone, technically, I guess wheelchair dancing wouldn't come under the sort of Olympic definition of sport, but it's still that idea of social interaction and engagement and fun, really, isn't it? Which is what it's all about.
Absolutely. I, for one, think that wheelchair dancing would probably be a lot better than a lot of the sports we watch at the Olympics. So good for her, and I'm delighted that she gets such pleasure out of that, and it clearly gives you a lot of pleasure as well, which is wonderful.
Thanks, Mel. I think we've got a question here from Keith.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I mean, some of the stories have been quite fascinating, really. You know, in terms of listening to everyone's, you know, I'm quite profound. As well as someone who like myself, I work in a university, basically, where I teach in Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts, and just listening to the stories, kind of exclusion and the way as a society that we basically do exclude people who are disabled from education and from all kinds of different activities, and most of the stories that we've kind of heard are based upon personal people changing things through their own personal circumstances, their own drive. I suppose my question really to the group is, if we are, you know, things obviously need to change in society, and I think Ian makes some really interesting points at the beginning about how we approach and how we change it, how we change certain things, and about not accepting certain types of exclusion in the way that we do. what would we need to begin to do in society as the first-based things to actually change that? Because as someone who works in the university, I mean, there are whole professions really that are disabled people are excluded from them. And I'm someone who's dyslexic, basically. And there are whole professions really that I'm fortunate because I fought my own way through that. But it's there are whole professions that disabled people are completely and utterly excluded from, that they're not being trained for certain professions. And I'm kind of, the question really is that general question: what do we need? What are the first things we need to be seen to be changing in society to make a more inclusive society?
There's two things I'd say to that. One is, again, I think Dawn's head teacher is the perfect example, that he or she saw that it wasn't just about Sam, it was about the other kids and about the teachers themselves. And that I thought was really profound, because it's people understanding that everyone is enriched by everyone's inclusion in society that makes a difference and makes the change. And, you know, hopefully we can clone that teacher and export them around the country. So that would be one thing. The other thing I do think is example. There's an incredible power of example. Steve talking about what he does with Everton and the football. You know, again, that inspires other people to think they can do the same. In the employment area, there are some extraordinary examples of societies which are changing things. There's a German-British company which is a software company doing really well, which only employs people with autism, autistic people, and uses their unique skills and has built a very profitable company off the back of that. There's a chocolate company, there's a TV company in Denmark which only uses people with learning disabilities. And again, it's very successful. I think there is the power of example and the power of change. It's both leadership and example and engagement would be the three things I think we need.
I think we've got a question from Simon Hart as well.
Yeah, this is possibly following on a little bit from Keith's question. Do you see attitudes changing in society now towards people with disabilities? I mean, can we end on an optimistic note? Can you give us sort of cause for optimism?
In the gymnastics community, my gymnasts are accepted as gymnasts, not as people with disability. It's not always the case, I find, on a personal level with Sam in the community yet. However, I know that all the children in his class who have known him since reception class, since he was 4, and are moving on next year to high school, every single one of those kids will never be afraid of approaching somebody with Down syndrome. They will always care about that person with Down syndrome, because Sam has always just been another member of their class. And it has been a wonderful experience for them and him.
Neville, I think you've got a question as well.
Well, it's not so much a question, it's an observation. Things will change because we have 3 brilliant people here. And what you need in society is people who drive things. And we've got 3 fantastic drivers. And that's why I'm really confident that things will change. And each of the people that have been on this afternoon, you know, if you keep the big picture in mind, what they've done is absolutely amazing. And they're the stepping stone for the next lot of people. You know, and one of the reasons why we wanted to do this podcast was to shine a light on people who were drivers. And I think the 3 this afternoon have been unbelievable drivers, and their stories have been fantastic. And I just want to say, look, whenever you're feeling a bit down, we realise how good a driver you are. You pushed your particular areas so far. And I think it's just great for everybody that we will leave here today, I think, a lot more optimistic than when we started the conversation.
Neville, thank you for that, Neville. And, you know, I feel a little bit constrained today that because we are 90 minutes with Neville Southall and we're kind of coming up on that. I thought if ever there was an episode needed an extra time, it would be this one, because I think we've all really enjoyed listening to everyone listening to everyone's experiences today. So I just want to thank you all for being a part of this today. Thank you, Steve Johnson. Thank you, Ian Biddle. Thank you, Dawn Rozelle Howens. Thank you, Neville Southall, for bringing everyone together today. Thank you, Simon Hart. And thank you to everyone for listening to 90 Minutes with Neville Southall. We look forward to seeing you again.